Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and welcome to episode 305 of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions, your one-stop shop for all compliance-related services. Today, I have with me Rakhi Kumar. Rakhi is with State Street Global Advisors, and they have recently released a short white paper which details a framework for how boards can work with management to incorporate a sustainability lens into a long-term strategy. It is a very interesting approach to corporate governance. In it, we look at State Street's proposed framework for evaluating the company's approach. We consider some questions a board of directors should address regarding sustainability. And Rakhi concludes with talking about how some companies or examples of companies who have sought to address sustainability issues and the successes they have had. The episode comes in at just over 20 minutes. I think you will find it a very interesting podcast and really helpful for you to think through some of the ways that you can bring an ESG approach to corporate compliance on the board. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today, you are in for a real treat because I have Rakhi Kumar, the head of asset stewardship from State Street Global Advisors, who's going to visit with us about some guidance the firm has recently released on boards of directors, corporations, shareholders, and other stakeholders and interested parties who would like to see more ESG and long-term value creation in the corporate world. Rakhi, first of all, thank you for joining me today.
Tom, thank you for having me.
So I'm a little almost embarrassed to ask you this, but could you explain who State Street Global Advisors is and what you guys do, and then tell us what your role is as the head of asset stewardship?
Absolutely. So State Street Global Advisors is an asset management firm. We're a subsidiary of State Street Corporation. We have $2.5 trillion of assets under management, and we're invested in over 9,000 companies globally. So we are really a global investor. We're one of the top 3 investors in the world. We're one of the larger passive managers, so most of our assets are in index strategies. We have all kinds of strategies, including active strategies, but a bulk of those assets are in index strategies.
Rakhi, most of my audience consists of persons in anti-corruption compliance and greater compliance. So it would be chief compliance officers, compliance professionals, lawyers in private practice, and business persons. And one of the things that we are concerned about is having boards of directors and corporations understand the importance of compliance and why compliance creates long-term value for a corporation. But it looks like to me, with the issue of its guidance, State Street Global Advisors has taken this concept really a step farther, because you really look at a much broader environmental, social, and company strategy and provide a framework. So I was wondering if you could tell us what the purpose for the release of the guidance was.
Yeah, so if I could just step back a little bit, and when you think about compliance, and I can tell you that initially when you think of corporate governance, and I got into this field in 2002, when I got into the field, everybody was a lawyer, because that's the job of the corporate governance was, are you complying with the regulation and requirements, right? The world has changed significantly since then. And I, as an MBA, couldn't find a job because I didn't have a legal background. So I was trying, and I thought investors should be more interested in this issue. And so fast forward, I guess, 15 years, and you've come to a point where investors are interested in ESG, and governance is a large part of the equation, but sustainability, which is a factor such as environmental and social factors, are also starting to get important. And the reason is because investors, especially index investors such as SSGA, who are long-term, and we're indexed, we have to hold the stock. We just cannot sell stock. So for us, the risks and time horizons are so long that these factors can have an impact. So if you think of 2016 and the issues that we've had, either with auto emission issues, food safety issues, and impacting they've all impacted stock and stock valuation. So that's why we as investors are looking at what kinds of risks what are companies doing to address both risks and opportunities stemming from ESG, and how are they mitigating or managing it, and does that protect our portfolios? So that's the context in which we have gone, what you would say, beyond just compliance lens to an actual proactive integration lens.
And one of the things you've done in your guidance is lay out a framework for evaluating a company's approach to sustainability. I was wondering if you could walk us through that.
Yes. So we've been engaging on sustainability issues for over 3 to 4 years now. And a large part of this guidance has been built off our experience of having spoken to over 1,000 companies globally. We're doing this right now, where we are evaluating companies and tiering them based on this framework, using this framework. So it's a 3-step framework. The step 1 is identification. So the question we ask ourselves is, has the company identified material, environmental, and social sustainability issues that are relevant to the business? Step 2 is assessment. Has the company assessed and, where necessary, incorporated those issues into their long-term strategy? Step 3 is communication. Has the company communicated its approach to sustainability issues and the influence of these factors on strategy? So what we found is companies that do all 3 are tier 1 companies. They're really using the sustainability lens, and they've incorporated or at least considered what impacts, if any, ESG can have on their long-term strategy. And they've positioned themselves for the long term. Companies that do 1 or 2 of them, for example, they may have a good sustainability report, but they don't really articulate the impact on strategy, really fall in the tier 2 bucket. And tier 3 are the companies according to us, are the greatest risk in the long term, because the company has actually failed to acknowledge and plan for business disruptions or opportunities that are related to sustainability factors.
You know, I'm really glad in step 3, you focused on risk, because that's what I see in the compliance and wider ESG world, is that companies which have not focused on this, which have not either planned or even worse, have not even assessed this risk, tend to be the ones that are the most blindsided and are sanctioned the most by the market. So one of the messages I'm trying to get out is that the market will speak. And when the market speaks, that's when companies seem to listen. And your guidance or framework gives the board some questions, and you've got actually a list of questions addressing sustainability for the board. And I was wondering if you could walk us through those.
Yes. So the other part of the guidance really is meant for helping companies through this journey that we call it and helping them giving them the tools to incorporate sustainability into strategy. And we really start, and there's six questions that we have identified, and I'll start with question 1. Again, focuses on identification. Has the company identified the sustainability issues that are material to the business? 2 looks at strategy. Has the company analyzed and incorporated sustainability issues where relevant into its long-term strategy? Question 3 is capital allocation. Does the company consider long-term sustainability trends in capital allocation decisions? 4 focuses on board skills and oversight. Is the board equipped to adequately evaluate and oversee the sustainability aspects of the company's long-term strategy? Question 5 is on reporting and communication. Does the company reporting clearly articulate the influence of sustainability issues on strategy? And 6 is really the integration into remuneration or compensation. Is the board incorporating key sustainability drivers into performance evaluation and compensation programs? So with this, if a company were to go and answer questions, they'd be able to understand the journey that we have seen other companies take and what we consider fully integrated companies or companies where they've fully incorporated ESG factors into strategy.
One of the things that I think makes your guidance so valuable is it is not simply a 40,000-foot view of sustainability with corporations looking at only grand strategy and the board asking specific questions, but you actually drilled down and provided some specific guidance for companies on how to address sustainability issues. I was wondering if you could highlight for us some of the key ones you believe.
Yeah, so really the purpose is more being illustrative for companies. What we did in this instance was focus on the tier one companies and see what they do that makes them stand out as tier one companies. And these are really only illustrations to drill the concept down, because it can be very, if we stay high level, sometimes it gets lost and everybody thinks they're doing it, but what does good look like is what we've tried to define here. And I think what I'd like to do is focus on the communication, because in the end, I believe a lot of companies may actually be even doing this, but it's where they fail is that communication aspect. How do you convince or an investor like SSG has access to boards, has access to management, and we can have the narrative and we can understand the narrative, right? And we can get convinced. But what if you have an investor who does not have access and they need to understand, they feel similarly? How are you communicating with that investor? And an example would be, one of the tier one companies, how do they demonstrate the impact is in response to obesity or public health concerns. A food and beverage company developed product lines that reduce the fat and sodium content. So that's an impact of, they identified a risk and then they said, all right, it impacted their portfolio of products and the way they were going to move ahead for the future. An energy company started investing in low emissions technology and actually started decommissioning certain carbon intensive operations to create a more diversified portfolio. In another case, an international coffee company changed its sourcing guidelines to reward farmers who use sustainable practices to make its supply chain more resilient. So these are cases where they've taken certain sustainability issues and they've actually taken action on a strategy side and have demonstrated it.
One of the things that I found very useful in providing these illustrations to companies was it's not formulaic. You present several different illustrations for several different problems, but you allow the individual sustainability practitioner or the compliance practitioner really to graph the solution based upon not only the risk to their company, but the size, products, market, all of the things that make a company unique. And that even as you walked us through the communication, you pointed out how different means of communications to different stakeholders in an organization can all move the ball of sustainability forward. Did I get that right?
I think that's a very good point you make, because this is hard to do and hard to communicate, right? And what we're trying to say is that, and we want to make it very clear, we want companies to consider them, but eventually we think it should be a board if we're focused really on strong, effective boards. Right? If the board has considered and they say that the impact is neutral and it doesn't impact it, that's fine. But communicate that the board has undertaken that exercise and has come out with the conclusion that nothing needs to change. Or if they feel that if something changes, then go ahead and communicate the impact of that. An example would be, I was talking to an oil and gas company, and they talked about how, because of climate risk, they decided to stick within oil and gas, but also go onshore and offshore, right? But they did not want to change the mix of the energy portfolio. That's fine. It's fine if they chose not to change the mix of the energy portfolio when everybody else in their group was moving to including renewables. The idea, the fact that the board thought about it, discussed it, deliberated it, and then made a decision which was right for them as stewards of the company, that's fine too. So I think that's what we're trying to get at.
The other thing that just struck me with that answer was that the communication you talked about when you provided the illustrative examples, I heard it as communication down the chain. down to various stakeholders. But in your answer you just gave me, you explained that there's communication even up from a board, up to the shareholders, up to the market, up to investors, and that I think in many ways, certainly senior management, but often even a board, are not focused on the communication up. Do you find that to be a valid critique?
I think that's definitely, and I would call that a low-hanging fruit, right? So we've had numerous conversations with directors, and we often say, so let's look at your communication, right? You have a very good sustainability report. You've identified all your key issues there. But when you look at your Investor Day deck, there's not one issue that you raised. You've focused purely on your quarterly results. You haven't really focused on the long term. You haven't really focused on the fact that, you've seen either climate or another health trend as a big macro issue that you're trying to address. There are very few companies actually bring that narrative of the sustainability report, which they have very good reports, into the whole business investor communication.
Well, Rakhi, this has been just a fascinating discussion. I wondered if anyone wanted to follow up with you or State Street additionally to get some information. Could they email you? And if so, how would they do it?
Yeah, so they should definitely reach out to me. My email is provided in the guidance, at the back of the guidance. They could also reach out to the head of our media relations, and she would be able to push that along to us to my team. So is the guidance available to interested parties? Yes, it is available on our website at ssga.com, and it is, I think it's the first, right now it's on the first bit. It's a letter, it's attached to a letter sent out by our CEO to the boards of our global holdings, so S&P 500 companies, FTSE 350, ASX, and German and Australian, German, and French companies. Well, I wanted to thank you guys for putting this guidance out. It's a wonderful tool. I think it's flexible enough to be used in a variety of situations, and I think it really fulfills what I have seen is a gap in the discussion of how to get companies to focus on sustainability from stakeholders other than employees, third parties, or even senior management. By having the investor class talk about this, I think you're really onto something for creating long-term change and, more importantly, long-term growth. Thank you so much, Tom. And again, thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. I have two requests of you. The first is, if you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate if you would rate us. It would help in our rankings. The second thing is, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to today's episode.